Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Okay, guys, I'm back. Where do I start? Seems like a long time ago I did my last video. And it was probably actually October 31st, Halloween, which is the day of the year I most look forward to. It's now over. I am not a fan of Thanksgiving. I'm not a fan of Christmas anymore. So when Halloween's over, I set my sights on next Halloween. So right now we've got about 11 months and 10 days or so to go till next Halloween. I'm still playing some of my Halloween music. I extend the holiday into November, even though it's late November now. But as you can see on my shelf, I've still got Brainy there, as well as a couple of my Halloween-themed radio show type old albums. Keeping the Halloween spirit alive, as a couple of my buddies do, I know. My good VC buddies, my good friends. And actually, doing this video, I think I got the date right. I can't be sure. And I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get this up tonight. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that. I want to say happy birthday to my really good buddy, who I'm not going to call out by name. I believe today's his birthday, and if it's not, I know I'm damn close to it. So I thought I would do a video because I didn't send him anything for his birthday. So I thought a video, which I don't have a lot to talk about, might make him happy. And like I said, it's been a while. You know, right up to Halloween, I was doing my videos, and I've had... you could probably skip the next few minutes if you want to hear me talk about music. But I've had an unusual time, pretty much starting Halloween morning at about 6 a.m. I got an email from somebody I used to work with, who told me that a mutual friend of ours that we also used to work with had passed away about 3 days before. And, it was kind of upsetting. This mutual friend of mine, of ours, that she told me passed away, I hadn't talked to her for about a year. But this is somebody that I was friends with for 29 years. And even though she had been sick, I didn't expect this. And it was weird. She passed away the day after my birthday. And she was just a few months older than me. So she was 58, and she died literally the day after I turned 58. So there's some weird, funky, odd coincidences there. She lived in a condo in the town right next to my hometown, where I lived until about 4 or 5 years ago. And oddly enough, when my old man moved in with his girlfriend about 7 or 8 years ago, he ended up moving into a condo on the same street where my friend who passed away lived. Now, that's quite a coincidence, especially in this area. Guys, we're right outside New York City. This is a very developed area. Just the fact that he even lived in the same town as my friend who passed away, but on the same street. I mean, there's hundreds of streets. There's hundreds and hundreds of condos in this one town alone. And I mean hundreds of condo buildings, including high-rises. So it was just an odd, coincidental thing with the timing of her passing away, with the fact that I found out about her passing away on my favorite day of the entire year. And then, just a few days after that, my dad fell and broke his hip and has been in the hospital ever since. It's a pretty serious thing when you're 91 years old. And so it's caused me, I haven't been sitting home as much. Day in and day out, I've pretty much been sitting home for the past year since I stopped working in October of last year. And once a week I go do my laundry. Once every 3 weeks I do food shopping. And that's pretty much been the only time I leave the house unless I have a doctor's appointment or something like that. And so suddenly my dad falls, breaks his hip. When you're that old, you don't even know if you're going to make it through the operation to get the replacement hip, which he did. Now he's in a rehab facility, and another odd coincidence, between my dad and this friend of mine that he never even met. He was only in the hospital for about 3 days and they did the hip operation, sent him to a rehabilitation facility on the same street that the hospital's on, which is in the same town where he lived and my friend who passed away. So it's all contained. It's a fairly large city, actually. And where does he go? There's a whole bunch of rehab facilities around, physical rehab facilities. He ends up going to the same rehab facility that my friend was in, the one who passed away, about 2 or 3 years ago when she had one of her multiple operations. And she was in the same rehab facility where I went to visit her several times during the course of her stay there. Now my dad's in the same rehab facility. Just weird. And this is literally days after she passed away. So that was kind of weird. And I don't go to. I generally don't go to funerals. I'm not religious at all. I don't like religion. I almost didn't go. There wasn't a formal funeral, but there was a thing at the gravesite where she was going to be buried. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go. And because she was Catholic and there's a whole bunch of religious stuff going on and, all this stuff that I don't subscribe to at all. So I definitely felt out of place there. But I did go. And as a result, I saw a couple people that I would not have seen otherwise. Old mutual friends of ours that, I was quite friendly with years ago when we worked together, and all these people had gone their separate ways. So somebody that I used to spend a lot of my work time with, just talking in general, and he lived also in that same town where my friend who passed away lived, and my dad lives now. But he had moved away to a couple hours from here in Pennsylvania a number of years ago, so I hadn't seen him. So I got to see him, and he was somebody that I really enjoyed the company of speaking to. So I got to see him and the guy that he lives with, and it was good to see him again. I don't know, his name is John. I don't know when I'm ever going to get to see John again. And it was weird. I saw my friend who passed away, one of her best friends, somebody that she went to school with, that she talked about a lot for the 29 years that I knew her. She's somebody that she talked to on the phone constantly. She lives a couple hours away now. So I'd heard about her, talk about her friend for ages, for 29 years, and I had never met her friend, and I saw her friend there. So and she's buried where her mom is, her dad is, her brother, and so there's some things I didn't. I didn't know. I didn't recall about the family. I knew her mother because her mother passed away only about 9 years ago, and I saw her mom on a few occasions back in the 1990s. And what I didn't know is that looking at the dates on the gravestone, that her father only lived to be 45 years old, which is sad, and that she had a brother who only lived to be about 22 years old, and both of them had passed away many years before I ever knew them. I want to say in the 1970s. So all that kind of was sad, and I didn't know that. I didn't know her dad was so young. I forgot that she even had a brother that passed away so young, and her only sibling that was still alive is a sister who lives in Florida, who they were at loggerheads with each other, and her sister did not come down for her funeral. So that's kind of weird. Weird shit, and all that coincidence with her and my dad living close together, and then my dad having the accident days after she passed away, and my dad's in the same rehab facility that she was in. So that's fucking weird stuff, man. That's all I can say about it. So anyway, enough of my personal history, and I've been going now to visit my dad daily, which involves me doing a hell of a lot more leaving the house than I've been doing in the last 14 months. The rehab facility could take me anywhere from just under a half hour to over an hour to get to. This is a heavily trafficked area with people coming and going into New York City from here. So, traffic is, I'm dealing with areas where probably 500,000 cars pass through on a daily basis, or damn close to it. Traffic I hit, a lot coming home at night. Now it gets dark real early here now, and one of the nice side effects, at least for me, of it getting dark early is if I know where I'm driving, I don't mind driving at night in the darkness. And people in the VC are probably going to understand this, even if they don't think the same way. There's something special about listening to music or audio in your car when it's dark. It's almost like you're creating this cave, like you're in a darkened room at home and you're listening to whatever you choose to listen to. In the daytime, I guess the distractions of visually being able to see all over the place might make the audio experience a little less intense. But at night, when you just got your eyes on the road and the lights of the car ahead of you, and that's about all you can see, there's something special about that. And my dad, pretty much fell and got injured right about the time that it started getting dark here at right about 5 p.m. So most times I'm driving home right around there, a little bit after that in the darkness, and I have this thing in my car that I do. I don't know if it's an OCD thing, but I have an MP3 stereo. My car stereo plays MP3 discs. I don't have to plug in an MP3 player. So, and I've had stereos, luckily, in my last few cars that played MP3 discs. And so I figured out, as far as bitrate goes, when you copy your music into a computer, you can choose a high bitrate or a low bitrate, whatever. And I figured out the bitrate that I can crunch music down to a certain file size, which is 192 is the setting that I use. And I cannot detect a loss in audio quality, and you kind of test that by taking some well-known albums, some albums that well that have, like a classical album or something like that, where there's a lot of audio highs and lows and, flutes and low-end basses and things like that. And you listen to a piece well, and you just check to see if anything is missing from what in there, or the horn's not coming through, or the flute not coming through, or the bass isn't, whatever. And so years ago, I figured out that I could use this 192 bitrate thing, and by doing that, I can fit on one single recordable CDR almost 8.5 hours worth of music. So to me, what I do at the first day of every month, I select a new MP3 disc to play in my car, and I put it in my car, and I play it for the whole month. Now, the way that I've been going, the minor amount of driving that I've been doing lately, in the course of a month, I've got about 8 to 8.5 hours on each one of these discs. I am not even getting, by the time the month ends, I haven't even been getting to the 3-hour point on these discs. I'm not even getting to the middle of these discs, because the only driving I'm doing is to the grocery store, to do my laundry once a week, to go food shopping once every 3 weeks maybe. If I got a doctor's appointment, those are probably nearby. So the amount of time I spend in the car has been quite small. Very little time. It's a total of maybe 3 hours a month total. So I'm not even getting halfway through these discs. Well, now since my dad's been injured and he wants company every day, and I've been driving to the rehab facility every day and hitting this traffic, I put in a disc back on November 1st. And it was probably a good choice. This time, instead of music, I chose an audiobook. And I think I showed this on my audiobooks collection, but I'm not sure, about Syd Barrett, A Very Irregular Head, which was a book that was put into the life of Syd Barrett. And this is unabridged. And they don't do this anymore. When they put these things on audio disc, when you talk about a big long book, nowadays, if they offer them at all on disc, they've been putting them on to MP3 discs and not regular audio discs. So this one goes back probably about 10 years or so ago. And at this point, they were still putting them on regular audio discs. So in this box set, which kind of got crunched from being kind of low on my shelf with a lot of other books piled on top of it, this unabridged audiobook has 11 CDs on it. I couldn't even fit this whole thing onto one MP3 disc. I had to put it onto two. 11 CDs and runs 13 and a half hours. So this will tell you how much driving I've been doing. It's the 20th today of November. I started playing this on November 1st. And I have gotten I'm about 13 hours into the audiobook. I completely went through my first MP3 disc, which was 8.5 hours, more than 8.5 hours actually, because I crunched these files down smaller because it was not music, it was just somebody reading. So, and I'm at the very end of the what would be the 11th CD, though I have it on an MP3 disc. I'm about 13 hours in with a half hour left, and another 10 days in the month and 10 days of driving this month alone. And I've gotten through this entire book. Isn't that something? That goes to show you how much driving I've been. I've been over 13 hours in the car, because every once in a while I even turn it off and I might catch the news or something like that and listen to the news for a little bit on the radio. So I haven't even been listening to the audiobook the whole time. Wow. So what I've been doing is over the years, I amassed quite a large collection of these MP3 discs that I've made. And I have a general rule that I follow. I generally only have one artist on these discs. I don't mix and match artists. One exception would be the ECM Records Works compilation albums that came out. I took the Works compilations and I put, I guess I fit 10 or 11 discs, I'm pretty sure, onto one MP3 disc of the Works compilations, and those were all different artists. But that's the one exception. I pretty much stick only to one artist. And over the years, I've made dozens and dozens, maybe 100 of these MP3 discs. All of them are in the 8-hour range, and I have now lost most of them. I had them in those little portable things that you slide the CDs into, these little cases that, you can bring them in your car. I don't know where the hell I put them. So I've got one case that's got 15 or maybe 20 of these in at most, and I've lost all the others. So every month I am now, in addition to whatever I decide I'm listening to, in the course of my month and my nightly play, I've also been trying to figure out what am I going to listen to next month in my car. So come December 1st, I have to find something new to make an MP3 disc of. And that drives a lot of my listening. Because first I'll think of an artist, but then it's probably somebody that I don't, I maybe haven't listened to the music in a while, and I have to figure out what order to put the albums in. I don't just do them the way they were recorded. I always stick my favorite albums at the top of the playlist, and the ones that I don't like quite as much at the end of the playlist, because on most months I'll never hit the end of the playlist. I'll never even get close to it. So I like to take my favorite albums and put them toward the top by an artist. And usually that means listening to the albums a lot during the course of the month. And so I've got quite a few discs of things like Tangerine Dream, and with Tangerine Dream I'm very particular. I only focus generally on like a specific period, so I'll have a disc of Tangerine Dream, just 1970s period stuff, or 1980s stuff, or the real recent things, or Edgar Froese solo albums, maybe mixed in with Tangerine Dreams albums that are essentially Edgar Froese solo albums. Edgar started doing this weird thing toward the last, I don't know, maybe the last decade that he was alive. And some of the Tangerine Dream albums that came out consist of him entirely playing and writing all of the music. And for whatever reason, instead of coming out as an Edgar Froese solo album, it came out as a Tangerine Dream album. So I look at those, and I generally don't mix and match. Here's one of them, and I'm showing this because this is a recent acquisition. This series, this is Summer in Nagasaki. This is one of a 5-disc collection, a thematic group of 5 discs that Edgar Froese did. And he recorded them not necessarily back to back, but over the course of several years. These discs, and the other one is Springtime in Nagasaki or whatever, I forget. The Wintertime in Hiroshima is another one. The last one is called The Endless Season. And this is the 4th out of the 5th one I have. I'm still missing one. But out of that series of 5 discs that, they're all instrumental, but they're supposedly a thematic theme. Edgar Froese completely wrote and recorded and plays all the instruments on 3 of them, and 2 of them have other band members in there. So it's kind of weird. So I've kind of, in my mind, I kind of separated the 3 discs that Edgar did on his own, and I'm putting those in with Edgar Froese solo albums, and the 2 discs that he did with the other band members I would put in with the Tangerine Dream albums, for instance, that have other players on them and other writers. So I kind of am very careful to have so many albums, And so, my MP3 discs, when I make them, are very well thought out, and there's a lot of work that goes into them. And just since I'm on the subject, one of their recent albums, they have three albums that Tangerine Dream just put out all together, and I don't have the other 2 yet. But this one, Quantum Gate, which was a long time coming, we knew this was coming for well over a year. I don't know exactly why. They had an EP come out, and called Quantum something or other. I forget the name now. And one of the tracks, they said was going to be on this album. It took this album a long time to come out, and when they came out with this, they also released 2 other albums, which I don't have, at the same time, which to me kind of doesn't sound like a good idea. But this is one of the latest, and this has some participation, it's not clear how much actually, of Edgar Froese, as well as the 3 current members of Tangerine Dream. It's not clear if Edgar's ideas, they're using are actual little sketches or little things that he wrote, and recorded in the computer, and they took those files and they added to them, or whether it was just music ideas that he sketched out. It's not sure. It's not really mentioned in here how what specifically they used, but I think he's credited with some guitar as well, which obviously he would have had to play. So this is an album that still has a certain amount of his playing on, and one of the other 2 releases that just also came out is also an album that's got Edgar Froese on it, and at the same time they're also releasing other CDs, like the earlier one, Particles, and one called Sessions that's out now, that's just the current members, and they're not using any leftover Edgar Froese material. But it's kind of weird that they're releasing these kind of simultaneously, mixing in things by just the members of the band that remain, and then a side-by-side release with something that contains Edgar's playing as well. Kind of weird. So I didn't pull the album for this. So I was trying to figure out what MP3 disc to make next month to play in my car. And I don't know how I got this idea exactly, but I thought it might be good to play something in my car that I don't listen to at home a hell of a lot. And the reason for that is it's kind of much more up-tempo music than I normally listen to at home. And I had a bunch of these discs. So, and I even just obtained a couple more. So if you guys know who Steve Hillage is, the British guitarist, sometime vocalist, who started off kind of playing with Canterbury guys, and Dave Stewart in his early days, the keyboardist Dave Stewart from Egg and National Health and all those bands. Steve Hillage probably got known to most people. First, he played in some pretty obscure Canterbury progressive rock bands in the early days that were probably more instrumentally than vocally oriented, even though there were vocals on their albums. He really got first known to the kind of progressive rock cult of people that loved the British stuff from the 70s as a member of Gong in the classic era of Gong. Probably to me the best album they did in that period with David Allen and Steve Hillage in the band and Tim Blake on synthesizers was an album called Angel's Egg, which is probably my favorite David era, Allen Gong era thing. Angel's Egg and You are probably their two best albums, but I particularly like Angel's Egg that Steve Hillage was a part of. I kind of stepped back. I didn't know him initially from that. But back in the I want to say 77. Yeah, the date's on here 76. I think I got it in 77. I have the vinyl somewhere, but I forgot to pull it. When I was just heavily into progressive rock and starting to step outside that and get into electronic music, I bought this album on vinyl as a new release called L, and it's probably Steve Hillage's best solo album under his own name, in the progressive rock vein. And it has vocals, and he does a remake of Donovan's Hurdy-Gurdy Man and a remake of the George Harrison song It's All Too Much. But the other four songs on the album are the things that I actually like better than those two songs, which are originals, most of which have vocals, but in a limited way. And I never thought that Steve Hillage made as good an album as this in terms of progressive rock music. His follow-up albums weren't as good. I think they were more groove-oriented and less musical. The interesting thing with L, which was I bought it as a new release, and it was one of the few albums of his under his own name that actually came out in America. This was his second solo album. His first album, I think, was on Virgin, was only available as an import. He very briefly, got an American record contract, and I forgot what label this was on originally. Got a contract in the late 70s, but only came out with 2 albums in America that didn't sell well, and after that you had to buy his albums as imports from the import section because his solo career was kaput in the U.S. And of course this was all in the punk era, and punk was not really commercially viable in the late 70s, but the record labels were kind of starting to sign bands more in that type of thing, and certainly New Wave, which came along right after that, and not so much in the progressive rock vein. The interesting thing with this album, for me, to this day, my favorite track on it is pretty much one long instrumental with just a little bit of vocals on it. It goes on for about 11 minutes. It's called the Lunar Music Suite. It's a 12-minute track. And it has Don Cherry on trumpet. Now, this was the first time I ever heard of Don Cherry. I didn't know ECM Records. I didn't know anything. And this is one of the things that got me looking into ECM Records, was hearing this wacky solo that Don Cherry did. And until this point, and here's the interesting thing, until I heard this on this album, in the context of this very electronic, synthesized album, you had acoustic drums, but very processed sounding electric guitars, electric bass, tons and tons of synthesizers. Even the vocals have phasing on them, so the vocals sound electronic. The guitar is very processed sounding, and in the heart of this big instrumental piece, all of a sudden comes this really far out trumpet solo, and I had zero interest in horns at this point. I didn't really care so much to hear a saxophone or trumpet or anything. My experience with them was pretty minimal. Most of the progressive rock bands that I listened to at this time did not have horns in them. Gong did, but I ended up buying the Gong albums after I got this. And so most of the things I heard with horns were bands like Chicago, where the horns are just an accentuation. They're not soloing. There are these very tight charts written, and it's more of a rhythmic thing that they do than anything else. Like Earth, Wind and Fire and Chicago and bands like that. Even like the James Brown horn sections. It's almost the horns are more of a percussive element. And they never soloed, almost never soloed. So I paid very little attention to horns. And I heard the solo, and it's just something, I kept on playing it over and over and over again. And the weird thing is, the solo musically is just wacky. It's completely out of key. I don't think Don Cherry knows what key the music's in, and he's just doing these sounds on the trumpet. So, like, if you played it for a trumpet player, they would say, this guy doesn't know how the hell to play trumpet. And yet, there's something so perfect about it. It suits what's going on, and it got me into trumpet. It made me finally understand and appreciate wind instruments of all types. And I started going out and looking for Don Cherry albums, and I found a few, and even Ornette Coleman. And I think I got like an Ornette Coleman and a Don Cherry album, not together, two separate things. I think I got that even before I got into ECM Records. I just hearing this trumpet solo just opened my eyes to the trumpet. And I think I ended up finding a Don Cherry album that was not an ECM album, that was something he had recorded maybe on Atlantic or something, because he was all over record labels. And then, a while later, I discovered El Corazon, I think it's called, the duet album he did with Ed Blackwell on drums, and Mew Parts 1 and 2, which are old. I think it's on Actuel Records, which was another set of duets that Don Cherry did with Ed Blackwell. And those intrigued me because they're just two people in the studio, and I love duet things like that. And it really helped open my eyes, and eventually I discovered, the Don Cherry things that he did on ECM Records, including the Cadona Trio, which I did discover a little bit later. But by the time I discovered, and I'm talking about, maybe a couple of years, because I just jumped into this stuff, and I just started absorbing it, and I found a whole new world of music, really through a single trumpet solo on this album. So I decided, I followed Steve Hillage for a few years, but his solo albums and the progressive rock thing were kind of getting very commercial, and like funky and groove oriented, and the writing wasn't as good as, what's on that L album, which I still like. I can still listen to that one. I don't listen to many of his other solo albums, with one exception. And here's an album that is totally different than anything else he's done in his career, but for those people that like, the Tangerine Dream, electronic, floaty kind of music, I have to, and I didn't get this one until quite a few years after it came out. 1979 album called Rainbow Dome Music, which is two 20-minute, one's 23 minutes, one's 20-minute piece. It originally came out on album, so one song per side, and it's just electric guitar and synthesizers. There's no bass, no drums, no drum machines or anything, just a very kind of floaty, electronic, two long pieces. He never did anything else quite like this. And for those people more into the Tangerine Dream side of things, I'd have to recommend this album as probably being the first thing to pick up, Rainbow Dome Music. And if you're up for hearing Don Cherry and more of a progressive rock thing, this is another classic album of his. Those two, I have to really kind of kind of recommend. And I kind of say I stopped following him by the time the 80s came around, because I had jumped in and started discovering ECM and more acoustic-oriented music before I got back into electronic music. And then quite a few years later, I guess probably once the internet came around, I wondered if he was even still alive. I mean, that's how out of touch I got with Steve Hillage. And I know he was doing a lot of producing at some point. I think I think after the early 80s, I don't know that he was recording solo albums so much anymore under his own name. The sales were extremely poor on his solo albums, I think even in England. And after a while, he started doing this techno thing. I'm not a big fan of techno music. In fact, I'm not a fan of it at all, really. But it was kind of this, it's an outgrowth of electronic music. And I did sample a few things to try to get into it. I bought a couple discs by The Orb that Steve Hillage actually collaborated with. That they're interesting, but I have to be in the mood for them. I have several discs by The Future Sound of London, which I actually like. Those are probably, in techno terms, that's probably the best stuff I've heard. I bought a couple of their albums, but it seems like the music was better on... They would do these these EPs that ran like 30-something minutes long, which were entirely made up of like 7 or 8 remixes of one song. But these remixes were so drastically different from each other that sometimes you can't even believe it's the same song, because sometimes they take out the drums completely. And so some of the Future Sound of London stuff was quite interesting. But it comes across the same problem that I have with most techno artists, and that's like, I don't know how many of these guys actually even play an instrument. I get the feeling that a lot of these guys, well, I know for a fact, not necessarily the Future Sound of London, but a lot of these techno guys don't actually play any instruments. Everything is done in computer with samples they take off of other people's records, and they loop, and they add drum beats to them, which are just... rhythm loops that you can do in your computer, so nobody's actually playing drums. It's not even a drum machine that's playing. And I still kind of like my guys to be hands-on. I don't mind electronic music, but I like it to be played, on a keyboard or whatever. But I found out that Steve Hillage got involved with electronica or techno music, or whatever the hell you want to call it, probably back in the 90s, sometime in the 90s. And I bought a couple albums with them, and because it's so up-tempo, I tend not to listen to them so much at home, but I thought it would be the perfect thing to maybe put on one of my MP3 discs from my car. So I had a bunch of them, and I started listening to them again in the last few weeks, actually. And so when he started his techno problem with his longtime girlfriend, Maquette, I think is how you pronounce her name, who they've been together since the 1970s. The first disc I bought, and I bought because it was a 2-disc set, was called System 7, or in this case 777. He doesn't go under his name anymore. He goes under the name System 7, which is generally just him and his girlfriend, and sometimes other collaborators, like the guys from The Orb, collaborate with him. But a lot of the music is just him and his girlfriend or wife. And the first one I bought was Fire and Water. And basically, it's an interesting concept. I like the concept, and I like the fact that there was 2 discs full of music on here. And the first disc is called Fire, and it's the more up-tempo version of a bunch of tracks. And the Water disc is the same tracks, but done in a more down-tempo way. So it's basically the same tracks with a completely different mix, lower key. Sometimes the percussion's completely taken out, and it's kind of spacey. And it's probably the best example of what he does as System 7, because he tends not to do much low-key stuff. The problem with a lot of the System 7 discs and a lot of techno music in general is a lot of it sounds like a rhythm track that's missing a vocal or has no melody or lead line, and it's just the, electronica when you take drugs and you dance, at the rave. This is that music. It's bump, 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 sometimes for 75 minutes, and it's basically a rhythm loop. And when it's bad, it's pretty bad, and that includes System 7. Sorry, Steve. There's not much guitar playing on a lot of these, and he's primarily a guitarist. But still, this is probably the best example because you get to hear the typical System 7 album, which is the thumping techno stuff. Sometimes really bad, sometimes it's catchy and it works. But also, with the Water disc, he takes the same material and calms it down, and it's lower key. And the lower key stuff especially is probably really good in the car. I mean, I'm going to find out because I'm going to make a disc out of it. So I started picking up some of these. This is almost entirely instrumental. I bought this other disc just called 777, which is also a System 7 disc from '91. And there's a lot of collaborators on here, mostly the guys from the Orb, and a whole bunch of techno people, I guess, that I don't know who they are. But this one is a rare example of an album. There's a lot of typical techno stuff on here, but this one actually has several vocal songs, and even there's a guy rapping in a couple places. And some other guys singing. It's not Steve Hillage singing, oddly enough, or his girlfriend, but they have guests that do the occasional vocal. So this is a little bit different because most of their albums don't have any singing. So it's weird to hear a vocal song, and especially because if I heard vocals in one of these albums, I was kind of expecting it to be Steve and his girlfriend, and it's not. They have guests doing the vocals and the rap. So that one's interesting for that reason, but there's a lot of the thumping techno stuff that is basically a rhythm, like a rhythm thing without any melody kind of thing. I bought another one of theirs. Over the years, I bought quite a few. This one, what the hell is this one called? Oh, Golden Section. I don't know what that refers to. The interesting, unique thing with this one is this is another one, no vocals. A lot of the thumping rhythmic music it's really made for raves, it's made for dancing for the most part, but if you play this stuff at not incredibly loud volume levels in your car, if you're not blasting it when you're driving somewhere, it's so simple you can kind of not focus on it and daydream, if that makes any sense, because it's so simple, it's not complex that necessarily draws your attention to it. The interesting thing with this album is they must have gotten hold of the original master tapes of the L album, and that great trumpet solo that Don Cherry does on the Lunar Music Suite. They took that trumpet solo because by the time this came out, Don Cherry had passed away. But they isolated the trumpet solo and built an entire new track around it that's nothing like the Lunar Music Suite that Don Cherry originally played on. So now that same note for note, same Don Cherry trumpet solo is broken up and appears in various spots on a track called, I think it's a track called Don Corleone. I'm pretty sure that's a track that they do it on. And it's a techno track with the same trumpet solo. It's not manipulated, it's not speeded up or down, but it is chopped up, and it's not, so there's, some phrasing of the original solo, and then maybe some music, and they stop the solo playing, and then they pick up where the solo left off. Very interesting to hear. You wouldn't know that this was recorded, that the trumpet was recorded for an entirely different track, entirely different rhythm and music. It's not evident. It really does sound like, somebody came in and blew that funky, weird, odd solo over this techno track. But it's not. It's note for note, that same track that turned me on to not only Don Cherry, but wind and horn music in general. So it's interesting from that point of view, but the track itself is not nearly as good as the original Lunar Music Suite track from the L album. But it's just interesting to hear somebody do that. I got some other, got a couple other, I don't have by any means, I don't know if my brain could take all of the System 7 albums out there. One called Encanto. This one I just got recently. When the hell? I can't even tell what year this one's from. I want to say it's probably the late 90s, early 2000s. There's no fucking date on it. And here's one from 2000 that I just got too recently, called The Power of Seven. The last two albums are I got together, and I just got recently, and I've been listening to them just because I needed enough to fill one of my MP3 discs. I didn't have quite enough albums to fill that eight-hour chunk of stuff, of space that I have on a disc. So I bought a couple of their other albums that I didn't have, but they're both, there's some catchy tracks on there, but both of these are a lot of the thumping techno, techno rhythm stuff that, honestly, Steve Hillage is a pretty decent musician, and I think he could spit out an album like this in a day, to be completely honest with you. But an interesting kind of side project, and not one that's really different. But back in around 2005, Steve Hillage and his girlfriend Maquette decided to make another techno album, but not call it System 7. It's called Mirror System, and this is a slightly mellower, less techno thumping and more keyboard textures and more low-key version, maybe a little bit more melodic with a bit more guitar playing on it. So they call this Mirror System, and it's just the two of them. I don't think there's any guests involved. But it really is just like a really good but more laid-back, more textural System 7 album. And this is better than any of the System 7 albums I've heard. This is really good. They didn't do another Mirror System album. They kept on putting out System 7 albums. And by the time they put out their second Mirror System album, that album, I recommend, this would probably be the third recommendation I have for a Steve Hillage disc, after the L album and the Rainbow Dome Music album is the Mirror System album. You get a little bit of the techno thump, but not real aggressive. It doesn't sound necessarily like it's a dance album, even though there's rhythms there. It's a little bit more laid back, like I said, more textural, more guitar playing, more keyboards. By the time they did, and this is from 2005, by the time they did the next Mirror System album, it wasn't an album of original material. I didn't buy it because it was just them doing remixes of other people's songs. And I don't know why they even would call that a Mirror System album. But just in 2015, they finally made another Mirror System album of mostly their own original material. There's a couple guests. Alex Patterson from The Orb collaborates with them on one track. They collaborate with another musician on a couple tracks. But 8 out of the 9 tracks on their next album of original material from 10 years on, 2015, came out under the Mirror System name, is called Endport, and this is their most recent album. It's only the third album that they made under the Mirror System name, and only the second one of really original material. For some reason, they throw one remix on here of somebody else's song. I don't know why. They just remix somebody else's song, and I don't know why they stick it on their own album. I don't know the original, so I don't know how much of the original is retained and how much changed it is by Steve and Maquette's involvement. But 8 out of the 9 tracks are original tracks, and this is very good. It's not up there with that first Mirror System album, which is called Mirror System. I thought there was a title to it, but it's just called Mirror System. But I will say, the 2 Mirror System albums of original material, including this one, this isn't as good as the first one, but it's still better than the other System 7 albums. I'm putting at the start of my my System 7 Steve Hillage MP3 compilation, because those 2 Mirror System discs are really the better. They do retain qualities of electronica, but even this recent one, this Endport thing, has a lot more texture to it, a lot more keyboards. It's a bit more musical, the stuff that's going on, a bit more guitar playing, and it's not just thumping techno stuff. It's a little more laid back. So I really thought this was going to be a 15-minute video, and this is hardly the first time I've said that and done that. But and by the way, it's pretty cold in here. I know I said I'm going to try in November. I doubt that it's going to go into December to get out here and do a video whenever it's warmer. It's not one of the warmer days. Well, it kind of we had a period of it being relatively warm about a week or so ago, but with all the running back and forth to the hospital and stuff like that, I didn't really get to do a video. And now it's starting to get cold again, so it doesn't show in the video. You don't quite see my breath yet, but we're getting there. So I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hold out in the garage for this year. So at some point I'm going to be doing videos back inside. But for now I'm just sitting here freezing my nether regions off. I'm going to, if I can think of something to do a video on, and we get any more warm days in November, I will do so. So I didn't intend to go on this long about stuff that people really probably don't want to hear about. But I did. So hope everybody's doing well. I just want to say happy birthday to my good buddy. And, I'll be back. And I'm not going to do vinyl pulls now because the video's so long. But I will come back. If we get a warm day, I'll come back and maybe just do a video entirely of me randomly pulling albums out from there, because I don't really know what else I can talk about. Okay, I will be back sooner than later, hopefully, guys. Hope everyone's doing well. Take care.